Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm going to use this little thing to mark the start of this meeting. Such power, such power. So formally then, welcome to this meeting of the Landlord Services Advisory Board. My name is Paul Rivers and I have the dubious pleasure of sitting in this chair, which is not as comfortable as it looks. Now, immediately following this meeting, I will be sitting to consider formally the recommendations for items 9. And members of the board and public are welcome to stay on for this very short meeting. So, moving on, item 1 on our agenda, apologies for absence. Leah?
I have apologies from Vice Chair Terry Daubney, Rob Stratford and Michaela Wicks.
Thank you. Anybody else who's not here who'd like to say something? That's good. Right, okay, item 2 then, to agree the notes of our previous meeting. Now, sometimes things go a little amiss, and I think in this case, clarification is required to reflect fully the notes, in the notes, what happened at that meeting. And Mayor Culper, and we will ensure that the board is circulated with sensible and correct notes. So you don't have to spend the next 20 minutes telling me what was wrong with them. I think we know some of that. I'll ask Annalisa now to pick up on any matters arising from that meeting, and then I'll just mention something about the HRA, the Housing Revenue Account, just to do it at the start of the meeting before you all drop off. Annalisa?
Good morning, everybody. I circulated a matters arising document to the board members following the questions that were raised at the last meeting. So there are a number of additional questions about the senior living after we'd done the presentation on the welfare checking calls. So you've been given information that highlights the age profile of tenants overall and by scheme. And we also provided additional information about who can apply for senior living and some numbers about the tenants who've opted in or out of the welfare checks. And there was also a request for some data about the percentage of checks that have been completed. So we were able to share that information as well, that during January, 100% of the checking contacts had been completed. And we provided you with a little bit more detail. I'm happy to take any questions arising from the senior living additional information. And then the 2 other points of interest were questions about the care line service. You remember we had quite a conversation about the welfare check and the support to people in senior living, but what happened to older vulnerable tenants who lived in general needs housing. So the good news is that we do have the care line service. We do promote it through GP surgeries, through our website and community spaces, and we also advertise the service in the council tax letters that go out once a year, and we will also be advertising it in the tenants edition of Homes and People as well, so they can share it with wider people.
Chairman, may I ask a question of Annalisa?
Yes, please.
To the care line to the wider tenants in our area, what is the cost of that, if any, please?
Let me put my glasses on, and it is £19.70 a month. And then the budget went through council on Tuesday, so there will be an inflation cost on that.
And
okay.
Can I just come back on that? If we've got vulnerable tenants, well, we know we've got vulnerable tenants living in our accommodation other than the senior living, and they can't afford that, is there any help that can be given to them to enable them to have that should they need it?
Okay, so there isn't an actual subsidy, but we do signpost customers to local charities who may help if needed. And then the third questions from our January meeting were around the solar panel systems that the council have. So again, I've provided you with some information about the total generation of kilowatt hours that have been produced on the homes over the borough, and given some background information about the fact that actually the generation has been within a range over the last 10 years that shows that they are working effectively, which was, I think, essentially the question. How do we know that the panels are actually working? And then the final point was Councillor Gale requested that I speak directly to a tenant, who I did do, and assured her of the generation of electricity in this panel she has, and advised her how to make the best use of it. So we completed all those matters arising.
Thanks, Annalise. Any other comments on that? I've had one or two tenants raising issues around our panels on the top of our roof panels, our electricity generating things, and something called birds that like to sit underneath them. I think maybe we could fit in something like that as a quick note at our next meeting to see if there's any advice that we can give generally about how to shoot the pigeons before they nest underneath. Last meeting too, we did discuss the proposed rent increases, between the 3% and 5%, and that discussion carried on at the exec and with members too. And those of you who did watch the last full council budget meeting will know that it's been set to 4%. I thought I'd take the advantage to read out Mark Merriweather's speech, at least in part, on the HRA, and maybe we can include that in our notes for this meeting. Is that likely to be a problem? Anybody see that as I mean, it's in public. It's in public anyway. But I think it does illustrate very clearly the size of our social housing, in terms of large numbers of pound notes. Well, pounds anyway. So bear with me just for a little bit. So Mark turned to the ring-fenced account, which is the housing revenue account, in which our social housing rental incomes are received, and which, together with some other income, can only be used for legally prescribed purposes. So it's not a holiday fund, unfortunately. These include not only the recurring annual costs of operating, administrating, and maintaining our homes, but also major repairs and upgrades, new affordable home developments, and talking in terms of big numbers, the servicing and repayment of £189 million mortgage. That's a whopping mortgage, isn't it? That the council was required to take out in 2012 to transfer the HRA to the self-financing basis that it has been on since then. The HRA is self-financing, which means that it is our social housing tenants alone who most directly experience the financial costs and benefits of the decisions that that the council takes and that this board advises on. So you're part of it. Yeah, sorry about that, Chris. So let me shift on down before you all go to sleep. We are well aware, we had the prospect of raising rents up to the value of 7%, which was a capital, which was a ceiling set by the government, or not to do it at all. So it's a balance really between maintaining enough revenue to maintain our houses, your homes, in a sensible way. So, as Mark says further down here, we are well aware that not using this 7% window to increase rents further could be perceived as a missed opportunity, as an increase above 4% could be, for example, have a positive impact by reducing the business plan's borrowing requirement. And these are the key points here. Every additional 1% in rent above 4%, which we set it to, equates to about £300,000 per year income, which compounded over the 30-year business plan horizon could generate 14.8 million of additional income, and which would reduce the capital borrowing requirement by 4.9 million. So we are dealing with big numbers here. So a 1% increase in rent for a 2-bedroom home is about £1.50 a week. But £1.50 a week is not small if you haven't got £1.50, and we are so well aware of that. He ended up by saying, with so many competing factors, the rent increase to be recommended, which was accepted by full council, has been subject to a deal of discussion within the administration and here the last time, and in the ONS, and of course between members as well. The range of increase most focused on has been between our original legacy default 3% and 5%. The proposal at 4% is believed to be on balance fair and reasonable, considering all the factors, but of course discussions went on in the budget meeting about that. So Mark went on to thank this board, Candice, for all her ability to add up. I mean, if you run accounts, you never take away, do you? So that's why we have double-sided accounting, save you subtracting things. Annalisa and her team, and the finance team, and everybody else who were involved in it. So we will put that in there for your delectation next, when the notes come out. So, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you're aware, everybody else probably wouldn't be, because unfortunately, Jackie and I went to garage, we had to leave that debate and we weren't allowed in the chamber to listen to it. The only question I had was that, as you know, in the past, the government have taken a lot of money from this borough, along with other boroughs, from the rentage that are paid. The old excuse was that it went up north to support people up there. Whether that comes into levelling up, I don't know. My question is, of course, do we still pay a lot of money to the government back in rentage, or has that finished now, and do we get the vast percentage to us?
I will take the opportunity to ask among our many members here if anybody knows the answer to that. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so none of our rent is paid over to government, no.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, so following self-financing, so you remember that Waverley lobbied the government about the subsidy regime, which was a negative subsidy regime for us, where 50% of our rents went to central government. So in 2012, the self-financing regime came in, and you'll remember we took out a 189 million mortgage to buy our properties essentially back from central government. So although we're not paying the government funds now, we do have to pay back that mortgage and that money, and that's what you see when we do the annual report. You might remember the pie chart. We show that where every pound how every pound is distributed across all the services, and that element of debt repayment is increasing.
Thank you very much. I will just apologise that I had a bad virus and I'm not hearing very well, so I do apologise if I look a bit silly sometimes.
No problem with that. Yeah, you and me both. A little touch of COVID earlier on leaves someone with a little bit of foggy touch, and there you go. Anyway, okay, so that's the notes bit. That's very good. I also have an apology to make as well, from my point of view. I didn't get my hair cut prior to coming here. Wednesday afternoons, they're shut in Farncombe. So just look away if you're...
I wonder if we need to put that in the notes, Chairman. I think it might be quite relevant.
Okay, well, we will see how we get on. Anyway, okay, moving on then. Item 3, declarations of interest. Leila, any received?
None received.
Thank you. And item 4, questions from members of the public.
None received.
And 5, questions from members.
None received.
Okay, just on that point, members, of course, you have the ability to submit questions for answers to be made at this this board's meeting, but there are issues around when you have to do it, like a couple of days in advance. Fiona, what is it, but 3 or 4 days in advance or something of the meeting? 4 days in advance gives us time to work out what the suitable answer would be. Fine, okay, so no questions from members, turnover, thank you. Took me a long time when I was at school to work out what PTO meant. So now moving on to the meat of the meeting. Item 6, we have a progress report on our approach to damp and mould. This paper provides an overview of the key areas for improvement and the measures Waverley has already actioned to address these. And are we going to, is it Steph rather, that's going to take us through, or? Oh, that's a new one. Okay, all right. So, okay, thank you. So, okay, progress on damp and mold. Matt Alexander, Operations Manager, will introduce the report, and we will inveigle Andrew Smith to discuss supplementary report on damp and mold in the wider housing context. So, Matt, over to you.
Good morning. So hopefully you would have seen the report and read the support was already submitted to the board. So I don't intend to reread this. However, I would like to highlight the background, where we're currently at with the working group and how we're moving forward with this. So a little bit of background. In May 22, Waverley commenced the damp and mould management review in response to a housing ombudsman's report in October 21. It was identified that 300 responsive repair jobs relating to damp or mould have been raised from a total of 13,000 in 21-22. As we entered the winter months in 22, the number of cases began to increase as anticipated, but this is also exacerbated following the publicity of the tragic case of Aweb Ajak. In November 22 alone, we saw 81 cases relating to damp and mould, and 56 inspections had been carried out or arranged. So we felt there was a need to establish a damp project working group with both operational and asset stakeholders to review and improve the way we manage cases of damp and mould in our council homes, as well as aiming to improve the level of service that we provide to our tenants. So following these initial discussions, the key issues were identified as data, communication, resources and process. So with data, this included out-of-date information and records, i.e. what works have been completed, and limited information as to what work was or equipment had been installed in people's homes, and if any maintenance of this equipment had been carried out or due. Communications, tenants we felt weren't always kept informed as to what works were being carried out and how tenants can help themselves with advice and support from Waverley. With regards to resources, this being officers, inspectors being available and in a timely manner, their workloads and priorities, i.e. these priorities over other inspections, training requirements for both technical and non-technical officers, having some decent equipment being available and not being reliant on the outside contractors that ultimately meant additional visits and more delays before any works, remedy works could be carried out. And process. So we found that there was certainly a variation of how works are managed, tenant engagement, and there was little or no follow-ups we felt it was easy to deal with the issue in hand, but we weren't potentially looking at other potential issues, the wider issues or concerns. I think felt we were somewhat tunnel vision, only dealing with the symptom and not the cause, moving on, getting it dealt with and hoping it doesn't come back, which was clearly not acceptable. So what are we doing to deal with these points? So regarding data, we had a dedicated officer to validate the historic cases that we had found. This was phone calls, visits, reporting back, and thankfully we're actually dealing with a reasonably small amount of live cases that were from historic records. We'll also be running a live damp and mould register, and this will be for any property that has been visited by an inspector and deemed to be a mid to high risk, and we're using the HHSRS rating system for that. Inspectors will manage see these works through, and we will be automatically ensuring follow-up visits are carried out at 6 months and possibly even 12 months reviews so we don't lose sight of the properties, and we review them say every 6 months or 12 months. And with the up and coming stock condition surveys, which will be hopefully starting from April, May time, we'll be able to fully understand our stock, which we feel is obviously critical to allow us to understand the fabric of the buildings, what equipment we have installed, and it means we can actually devise a proper planned works and cyclical maintenance programme. Communications, we hope that we'll be able to put the info from the damp and mould and condensation onto our website, so it's a bit more proactive. I think we're going to feature something in the Homes and People magazine, and we'll continue to do so over the coming quarters. We may look at also have an article about how to get your property ready for winter. And we have some updated leaflets which we can leave with tenants, and I suspect we will have, well, I know we will have some more initiatives over the coming months prior to winter. Resources, we completely recognise the need for upskilling our technical teams, and we've already looked into and are about to book a day-and-a-half's training for those guys, and that will include our repairs contractor. We're also going to be looking at having some training sessions booked for non-technical officers. So this may include housing officers, customer services, basically any potential officers that may visit homes with our tenants that need to recognise damp and mould condensation and be able to give some feedback. We have purchased some equipment for inspectors. That's literally arrived this week, so we'll be issuing that in the coming days, and that will tie in nicely with the training sessions. And we're working with customer services to see how we can log and track these calls. I think there's a lot more discussion we can have with that, with them triaging these calls, so they can actively proactively prioritise if needed. But again, this will involve levels of training and scripts or things like that. And finally, process. Damp register will be an active part of the process, being managed as a live document by a dedicated officer, and will hold the relevant dates and information, allowing us to engage with other areas such as housing officers where deemed appropriate. Properties will only come off the register after they've had the follow-up visits and they've been completed, and we're satisfied that the damp and mould has been eradicated. But even then, they won't be deleted. They'll still be on the tracker. They just won't be considered as live, but we won't lose sight of them. So our Special Projects Officer, Steph, who would have been presenting this, is currently working on this process and the policy and the overarching strategy. And we recognise this is not a short-term fix and will be a long-term continuing process. And finally, there has been a further announcement from the government regarding a AWAB's law, which is likely to come into effect later this year. Among other things, it will pose strict time limits on housing associations and landlords to both investigate and fix these serious problems. So once we get more information on that, we'll have a further review and look at our timelines. Thank you.
That's great, Matt. Jackie?
Thank you for that, Matt. I'd like to thank the officers for a really full report on this mould issue, because it is a very serious issue. And, you know, I can understand that there are some issues of mold and damp where people don't open their windows and they have heaters on and what have you, and it does cause a huge amount of problems. But I think there are other issues where I know, for instance, in Hazelmere, where there's a serious issue with mold, but it's not just in one area of this little sort of block of flats. It's in several of the flats. Some of them are private now, but it's very often it can be the fabric of the building that's the problem, and not just by not opening windows or whatever. So I'm really pleased that I read somewhere in this report that there's going to be, if necessary, outside assistance with technical issues. And I'm really pleased with that because I think the more that we can address this issue and the more the tenants understand, quite rightly, what they need to do to help themselves, it's great. But I think we have to get to the basis, as you rightly say, of where the mold is coming from. And is it more than just a surface, or is it much deeper into the fabric of a building, which in some cases it seems to be. But thank you very much for your report. I'm really, really pleased to read it.
Thanks, Jackie, for that. Yes, and I'm sure our officers take that on board. Let us recognise too that our officers have been very proactive about this, even before the Ombudsman's report on this some 2 years ago. So this has been an ongoing piece of work, and we recognise that it's a tough one to grasp, keep hold, and move on. John, before that, let me just ask Matt if I, as a tenant, after 5 or 6 days of heavy rain, wake up and look at that sudden black patch on the ceiling, how big does it have to be before I, as a tenant, would need to get worried, and who should I phone? I mean, this is an area perhaps for our magazine next time round, but you know,
so
what would you tell me to do?
I would suggest if any mold or damp is present, then certainly call customer services. We will prioritise anything that's damp and mold. So our inspectors we are stretched with the resources, but they will prioritise any damp and mold. It may be a case of giving advice. It may be a case that they will have to look, you know, in the loft, and there may be some ventilation issues or something else that's causing it. But we produced a small booklet which will go out to the inspectors and housing officers, and it will basically show what we consider a level 1, a level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5. So that's a guide, and if it becomes a level 3, 4, or 5, then it will come onto our damp register, and we will monitor that and deal with that. But the inspectors will be the best place to help. It's maybe just a cold spot in the corner. Yeah, obviously it could be various issues, but yes, I wouldn't hesitate for any tenant to call in if they spot any damp and mold. It's one of those things that if you leave it, it will only get worse.
Thanks, Matt. John, you have a question.
Thanks, Chair. Couple of things. First of all, obviously, we talk about in here getting specialist services in. We're also talking about the resources required for different parts of it, with new equipment, training, and goodness knows what else. Can I be assured that we've actually got the resources to cope with all this, both in financial terms and, of course, for manpower? Because I know before we've spoken in here about the lack of officers we have in certain departments. Now, obviously, I want to try and take this seriously, which is why I'm bringing that part up. So can I just have an answer to that, and I'll ask a second one after that? Thank you.
Who would like to address that? Oh, Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Rubini. Yes, it is an issue. Certainly, Matt, since he came into post, has been looking at his team and how he can deploy the officers he has most effectively. We've identified where the gaps are and we need to recruit. It is a difficult market to get the right people at the right price, but we're doing all we can to make sure we are upskilled and also have the resources. So it's an ongoing continually reviewing our staff, our officers, and how we can address the need. I can't say we're there yet, but we are making very positive progress.
Thank you for that. The second part of my question is possibly nothing to do with us, but I'll ask it anyway. This is obviously a community problem with finances to the individual houses, etc., and we don't have the whole of the landlord responsibility. If we come across other areas such as social housing where there is some problems with mould but are not our responsibility, are we able to pass it on to other organisations? And how would they react when we do it? Is there some mechanism to actually follow it up, or are we very isolated?
John, this might be part of Andrew's wider housing comment, which if there are no other specific questions, I can ask Andrew to pick up on, and then we can come back if you can ask a question on that. So Andrew is down to discuss a supplementary report on damp and mould in the wider housing context. I suppose that's for people with wider houses, is it? Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think you've had a paper circulated in your pack. It has been raised at board before about housing associations and the private sector market, what the issues there regarding damp and mould and how that's being addressed. 6 housing associations got written to by the Secretary of State in November, including 2 of our 3 largest social landlords in the borough, Clarion and Southern Housing Group, with the best part of 800 homes in the borough. They had findings of severe maladministration made against them by the Ombudsman, as you'll see. Both Clarion and Southern Housing Group contacted us. We didn't have to contact them, and basically told us clearly what they were doing about the issue. And you'll see in your pack what Clarion are doing. There's a whole list of sort of bullet points there that they're investigating and taking it very, very seriously. The interesting one for me when I saw this was Southern Housing Group, Yvette Carter, Group Director, reported to us the particular cases in the borough, and you'll see there how many there are. Interestingly, a third of them are on the Oxford Park estate, which is new build. So very interesting to see new build houses having damp and mould issues. But they are taking it seriously, and I'm reassured that they're doing all that they should as landlords. We have a housing association forum that meets 2 or 3 times a year that's facilitated by our housing strategy enabling managers Alice Lean and Esther Lyons, and that is a fixed item on the agenda, so we do get the updates. The private sector housing, Simon Brisk, our private sector housing manager, and just move my mouse down. There are 8,000 private rented homes in our borough, as you'll see. 0.05% affected by category 1 damp and mould hazards. Now, clearly that's what we know. There may be others, and 1% affected by category 2. And the private sector housing team have been very active, and Simon has advised what advice and enforcement action may be taken, and there is a quotation from Simon on the sheet. So in terms of housing associations in the borough and private sector housing, action is being taken. I think Councillor Rabini's comment is an interesting one. What happens, and actually this is not only damp and mould, and it'd be useful for members to know this, I think, when a tenant from a housing association raises issues with us, as they do from time to time, it might be damp and mould, it might be anything from ASB to leaky roofs or whatever, we have to urge the tenant to take that up through the complaints process with their landlord, because there's not much else we can do until and unless we can threaten a visit from the private sector housing team to a housing association should these complaints be unresolved. In my years of housing, and particularly as I've been in local government now for nearly 15 years, members have considerable clout. And so if a tenant contacts a member, and the member will contact me as a rule, and things are not happening, then that member I can put that member in touch with either the chief executive or a senior officer within that housing association. And it is amazing how things get done. This was very clear in Alfold, where Councillor Kevin Denis got involved and kicked the proverbial, and things happened. And members can often do more than we as officers can, because they can then have that, they seem to have that access to the higher echelons. And having said that, if that doesn't work, and I've known this happen before, the member, the portfolio holder, can then deal directly with the chairman of the board of that housing association, and then you really do see action. So that is the way to escalate. As a council, unless the complaint is unresolved and we can send in a private sector housing environmental health officer, it really is for the tenant, first of all, to go through its complaints process with the landlord, and then members do have a role to play to get action. I hope that answers Councillor Rubini's question. John?
Yes, thank you very much for the explanation. I just wanted to take it further from your report. And now I feel a lot happier that the process is in place, so that even if the first part failed, we have other access to get something done.
Yes.
And so, like everybody else, I'd like to thank everybody here for their reports, particularly some of the reports you've written there. It does help me to feel a lot easier about this mould. Thank you.
Dennis, are you looking at, you ready to?
Just a question for the gentleman there. We had a problem in Shepherd's Court of the guttering, where it was blocked up by the leaves from the trees when it, they came and done it. They cleared all the guttering. That was great, fantastic. But the reason, what I'm getting at is, the fact is, when they are blocked, those gutters, not only does the rain fall that way, it falls that way as well. So therefore, you could be some of the problem you've got within the damp, as you're saying. What is the position on looking at the guttering in social housing? Have you got to wait for a complaint, or?
No, there is currently a programme just being sorted about cyclical gutter clearance for senior living schemes only at present. There isn't anything cyclical for flat blocks or houses currently.
Right.
I'm aware it's a potential issue, but I think once the stock condition surveys have produced the information that they can produce, we will know which ones are the worst ones, which ones may need a yearly, twice yearly, quarterly, a cyclical programme.
On your experience, do you think that that could be some of the problem, where the gutters are, the guttering is full, so therefore the rain is going over on the inside?
It's certainly possible. It could be numerous reasons. Yes, it certainly could be possible.
But you're not going to, you haven't got to wait until somebody complains. Surely that you should put that in the programme.
As I say, we will do a cyclical programme for we wouldn't be able to do a cyclical programme for every single property. I think it's going to have to be defined as to which ones would need it more. You know, we've got overhanging trees or areas where we know that's going to be more.
Like Shepherd's Court.
Potentially, certainly senior living schemes, there is a programme being devised. I think it's going about procurement any minute.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much.
But I just wanted to say, so when I mentioned earlier with our inspectors and our training and stuff, it's certainly more a case of looking at the wider issues, not just there's the damp, we'll deal with it. It's why is there damp, you know, and looking at the holistic view. But you're right.
Thanks, Dennis. Danielle?
Hi, I've picked up 3 points during the course of the discussion. First of all, when you mentioned in the communication section about communication education, it would be really helpful, I think, to probably in Homes and People or somewhere else, to really dig into what causes damp, and not just, oh, you need to have ventilation, but the science behind why it needs to be ventilated, about warm, moist air hitting cold surfaces, and you know, the possibility, keep an eye on your gutters, there could be leaves, just so that tenants really know what to look out for, why to look out for it, and give them all the information so that they can understand. I think it could be a helpful thing for everybody. And I just wondered, on the online reporting form, is there the facility to include a photograph?
To answer your first question, yes, I agree with you. And there are the leaflets do have relatively good information. Like, did you know boiling a kettle can produce X amounts of litres of, moist air, etc. That kind of thing. I think there's a fine line, obviously, of how much detail and how much wording you want to put in it to put people off, But I agree. We'll continually revisit that and relook at that and make it try and pictorial or the wording needs to be reviewed. Second question, the answer is I don't know. That I agree. I think that would be fantastic if we can do that, if we can get pictures into customer services. I don't know at the moment. I don't know. I'd have to find out.
It might be just a way to sort of speed up the process. If I've got this damp patch, so instead of someone thinking, okay, we'll get to it, they could go, crikey, we need to get to that fast, or not so much. It could be a helpful tool. And lastly, yes, I noticed about Oxford Park as well, and it's still being built. These houses, presumably with the same design issues, continue to go up. Is it over to the social housing providers, or should the builders who are still on sites be liable for fixing it?
It's a very good question. From what I understand, Southern Housing Group are looking at that very carefully, and they will be speaking to their contractors and their developer partners about that. I have a contact. I'll see if I can find out what they're actually doing. Daniel.
And the fact that the houses are still going up, you have to worry that there's some fundamental design flaw that they really should be dealing with before they're just building more houses with the same issues.
Yes, I agree.
Thanks, Danielle. And at last, Jackie.
That's all right. Well, Danielle's asked the question that I was wanting to ask, because there is quite a concern, I think, that if we've got new housing going up and we've got damp and mold in it already, there has to be a question asked of the builders as to why this is happening. And certainly, if Andrew can dig into that and find out what on earth is going on, have they done something that's not right? If they can't find out what's going on, do they continue to build until they can sort it out? I mean, that is the question that needs to be asked, because if we're putting up properties that are going to have mold in them from the offset, it's very, very poor.
Yeah, and of course, cost of living and impact of high energy prices means that people are not turning up the thermostat in the way that they may well have done in more economical times, if that's the right word. Danielle?
And I guess, but the fact that the problems are clustered in certain areas does point towards it being a design with those specific buildings. And Northbourne, I think that's a relatively new build, isn't it? When was that put up?
I think that is I was going to say a hotspot, but I don't mean to say that. Andrew?
Multiple. Yes, I think that is recent. Again, I can try to find out more about that. I think as well, this information becomes public, and certainly Carla Homes or whoever are marketing the homes on Oxford Park will not want this publicity. So my guess is when I dig into it, they're addressing it very seriously, but I will get something for the board.
Thanks, Andrew. Let's move on now to item 7, senior living consultation findings. Amy, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm here to talk about the consultation that recently took place in senior living schemes. I'm going to begin by summarising the final outcomes from the action plan based on the previous consultation, then highlight some of the key findings from this year's consultation, and then introduce the new 2023 action plan. First, just a brief reminder of what senior living is. So there are 8 senior living schemes across the borough. Each one has about 30 self-contained flats and then a communal laundry, lounge and gardens. The service itself aims to empower tenants to live independently, And there are 5 senior living officers that work across these 8 schemes, and their primary focus is managing the building health and safety and then signposting tenants to support services where necessary. In 2018, when the service changed from sheltered housing to independent living, we committed to carrying out an annual consultation. The board should be familiar with the 2022 action plan, as you received regular updates on it last year. Of the 18 actions that were included in that, 16 of them are now completed. The other 2 are in their final stages. So the updated job description for the senior living officers is expected to be approved next month. And then the decoration programs continue to be shared with tenants as decorations get scheduled for their schemes. There are 3 schemes scheduled to be decorated this year, and tenants will be consulted closer to the time. There are 4 highlights on the board that came out of the action plan. So a permanent accessibility review group has been set up, made up of tenants that review how accessible the communal areas are to tenants with mobility issues. The CCTV installation project is moving on and is expected to be installed by the end of the summer. The relationship between the senior living team and the tenants panel has been strengthened, and the chair of the tenants panel now attends every other monthly senior living team meeting, and communication between tenants and the senior living officers has improved, but I will touch on that more later. The most recent consultation took place in December this year, and 116 tenants chose to respond, which represents 45%. There were 5 different methods that tenants had to respond to us, but the overwhelming majority chose to use the paper questionnaire. So in each scheme, I think I had 3 tenants attend my drop-in feedback sessions, and a similar number used the other methods. There are 2 key findings that I want to highlight. There's a full summary in your packs, and I'll be happy to answer any questions about specific questions at the end. So firstly, there were high levels of satisfaction among tenants, and many chose to comment on how hard the officers work and how much they appreciate their warm, friendly and helpful approach. And then these levels of satisfaction were consistent across the other more specific questions about building safety and accessibility and so on. The other issue that I wanted to touch on was communication. A key part of the previous action plan last year was improving communication, and when comparing results, this was a clear area of improvement. Not only because the proportion of tenants that responded yes to whether they think they're kept well informed was 23% higher this year, but also when you look at the free text responses for when tenants were asked what needs improving, the previous year, all of the comments focused on asking for more communication or more information to be shared, whereas this year the focus was on slight tweaks to the way in which the communication was shared, looking at the tenants meetings and larger print on the notice boards. Finally, introducing the 2023 action plan. So we've taken the areas of good practice and the areas of improvement that have been identified by tenants, and we've created an action plan. It is included in the report pack, but I've summarized it on the board there. So you can see at the top, we've got the notice boards and tenants meetings. So that's the communication continual improvement that I was just discussing. And the good news is we've begun to make progress in all of these areas. The letter explaining the consultation outcomes was sent out to tenants this week, and it included the topics about the tenants meeting and clarifying the role of the senior living officers and beginning to discuss better use of the communal spaces with the tenants. The CCTV and the accessibility projects continue to move forwards, and all of the specific repair issues that were raised by tenants in the consultation have been identified where possible and chased up or reported. Now, I appreciate that's a whistle-stop tour of the consultation, so I'll be happy to take any questions alongside David about the responses.
Amy, very well done. Thank you very much for that. Jackie?
Yes, can I just ask Amy, on page 25, item 10, sorry, item 11, the sky upgrade, is that being sort of looked at?
That might be best for David.
So Morning, everyone. So I think that's in relation to the Wi-Fi, where it says Sky, that refers to Wi-Fi upgrade, basically. And the short answer to that is no. We've decided not to progress with that for the time being. Currently, we provide Wi-Fi in communal areas for tenants, and it's their responsibility to provide Wi-Fi in their own homes. And I had a number of discussions with Sky about completing a possible upgrade, but there's a number of challenges to it, because what we were looking to do was to roll it out across all of the homes in our senior living schemes. But you've got tenants; it would restrict tenants' choice really in terms of what their broadband facilities would then look like. And some are tied into contracts and so on and so forth that they're happy with. So it was just, there were a number of complexities to it really. So what I actually wrote to the tenants at the beginning of this month, just to explain that decision, to say that we would continue to provide Wi-Fi in communal areas, and it would be to continue for the tenants to provide their own Wi-Fi should they choose to wish so in their own homes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, David. Any more questions, comments? In that case, Amy, thank you very much indeed. We'll move on now to item 8, a summary of the regulator of social housing briefing that we had a couple of days ago. It was an interesting time. Sorry, Annalisa, to you.
Good morning again. I thought I'd take the opportunity to just do a recap about the following the presentation from the regulator last Wednesday. I think most of the members and tenants in the room attended. Can I just get a show of hands? I'm sure I saw you on the screen, Councillor Keane. So, so we had the presentation last Wednesday from Kate Dodsworth, the Director of Consumer Regulation from the Regulator of Social Housing. And I really wanted to get your views about that and just kind of go over a little bit of the history and what we've got coming on the horizon as a housing service. So you will all remember the terrible tragedy of Grenfell, and that really kick-started a movement to investigate social housing. And you'll remember that we had a green paper after Grenfell that identified key issues with social housing. That tenants, many tenants nationally, didn't feel listened to by their landlords or respected by their landlords. And that led to Waverley doing a piece of work called Attitudes to Council Housing, Pride or Prejudice, which was a really good piece of work for us within the borough. So we've moved from the green paper to the white paper, and within this board we've talked about the charter for social housing residents that was coming, and that's now been implemented into the social housing regulation bill. We're expecting this bill to come through in spring. At the moment it's going through parliamentary debate, and as Matt mentioned, there is some amendments and recommendations to that bill, including a section of AWAB's law about damp and mould, and putting more responsibilities on landlords and strict timeframes about how and when to deal with damp and mould. And the regulation bill, as it says, regulation enforces the regulator for social housing. They're going to have more powers. They're going to increase their consumer standards, looking in more detail at safety, transparency and energy efficiency. They're going to have more enforcement powers. So at the moment, the regulator can get involved with housing associations on finance and governance issues, but on the consumer standards, it's been left to co-regulation, and there's not really any teeth if things are going wrong. And the test for the regulator to get involved was if there was a risk of serious detriment, which is a very high threshold. And the regulation bill will, when that becomes enacted, will remove that threshold and give the regulator more powers to get involved with social housing landlords. And it also makes people in housing work together better. So there's a memorandum of understanding between the housing regulator and the housing ombudsman. So the housing ombudsman service takes individual complaints from tenants when they've been through their own landlord's complaints process, but those are one-off issues. The ombudsman does then collate that information and provide spotlight reports like we've seen on damp and mould and antisocial behaviour and noise, but they don't have a bigger view, but they're going to work closely with the regulator so that if the housing ombudsman finds a systemic issue somewhere, then they can advise the regulator and they may take steps to investigate further. So I also circulated the implementation plan that the regulator has. So really to give this group warning, we're going to be doing a lot of consultation in the spring and summer. As soon as the bill is enacted, the regulator, I think, has got everything ready to go. They've got their new standards and they're going to start the consultation process. So as a board, and I think potentially this should be an away day activity, but I wanted to share with you the vision for consumer regulation. And these are the 6 key themes that the regulator wants to work with. And it's how does that fit with us as Waverley? Do we feel that we're meeting these? Can, you know, as a board, could you say, yes, I know that we're doing these activities? And what assurances do you need from officers to help us do that? So we don't have the time to go through them all today, but I just wanted to raise them for you to start thinking about it, and we'll be doing more work on in the future. And what was really key and really good to hear from the regulator was about how they're going to measure success. So they're getting new powers. What are they going to do with them, and what does success look like to them? And the key thing for them is that whatever they do must make a meaningful difference to tenants. So if they're regulating landlords and they're coming in and questioning, they've got to see a tangible difference to service to tenants. They also recognise that landlords must be able to deliver their expectations. So we can all sit here and say, oh, I'd love us to be carbon neutral by 2025. And I'd like to make sure that every tenant has got a electric charging point for a car outside their house, you know, but that's not a realistic expectation. The regulator is very clear that they know there's challenges in social housing, but as long as those challenges have been thought out and you can evidence why you're putting your resources into this topic rather than that topic, and that people understand that, then they're happy with that. It's about setting expectations. And the third point was that they must be able to regulate against the standards. So they could come up with some lovely words, but are they actually measurable? So they need to make sure they can regulate. Oops. I've forgotten how to go backwards. There we go. So the new consumer standards that are coming are around safety, quality, the neighbourhood, and transparency is a new standard that's coming in, and that's really about the landlord-tenant relationship. We're sharing information about how we're performing, people can hold us to account, and so that links with the engagement and accountability, and also the tenancy standard about making sure people have got a robust tenancy where we're allocating tenancies fairly, and you'll know the piece of work we did moving from flexible tenancies to secure tenancies has been a really positive piece of work for that. Just to mention about the transparency, you may remember that last January we did some consultation to feed back to the regulator about the tenant satisfaction measures, and that's a set of 22 indicators, half of which are about management statistics and half of which are tenant insight information, and we'll be coming to you next time to give you a little bit more of an update about that. And then I thought it would be nice if we could have a brief discussion from the implementation plan and the vision, from your views about the session on Wednesday. We need to work together to make sure that you get the assurances that the standards are met. We need to be able to demonstrate co-regulation, how we're working with tenants. If there's any requests for knowledge or training, give you advice that we will be coming to you to talk about the consultation exercises and just generally any questions.
Thanks. And these are comments, Chris?
Can I just ask, as a tenant, how close the tenant can get to the regulator?
Good question. Let me think that through. So as a tenant, you can look at all their information on the website, and I believe you can make direct contact. So there have been tenants in the past who have whistleblowed to the regulator about something their landlord is not doing correctly.
So they can do that on a direct
Yes.
basis?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That would also apply to, sorry, Annalisa.
Yes. What I should say is we need to put that in context. And of course, I would want any tenant to firstly contact us as the landlord to raise the issue so we can rectify it. We do have a complaints process. We have the ombudsman process. So it would be a very serious issue that you felt had been ignored and you hadn't been listened to. So say if you were a tenant at Grenfell and you'd been reporting your concerns about fire risk and you felt ignored, you'd been to meetings, nothing was happening, then you could report to the regulator. But the first step is always to contact us to resolve the issues.
I assume in theory, there wouldn't be the necessity if like Waverley were accepting the regulators' comments, etc. Then you shouldn't be any need. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I've got you, John, next, but how would this differ between what the ombudsman could do?
So the ombudsman will take individual complaints. The regulator will look at systemic big failures rather than individual failures. So it's organisational failures rather than a failure to an individual tenant.
Okay, I think that certainly clarifies it very well for me. John?
Yes, thanks. I found it a very good presentation on the evening. It certainly is a way ahead to try and get things in a better order. My concern at the time was, when I raised the question, was about, it's all very well having these things and powers, but everybody knows that on television, other things, you see these reports of local authorities and others, landlords saying, oh yes, I've learned a lesson and I'll put it right. But I must admit, the answer she gave with the powers they're going to get and the fines and what they can do made me feel a lot better. That in fact, it's not just a matter of talking to people. It could be that they're actually going to use these powers to make sure that they will react to what they find, rather than just sitting back. And as I say, a lesson learned. They never are, because you see it again and again and again. So hopefully these extra powers will actually create the atmosphere to get something done. And she did seem to be saying that she would be checking up on those afterwards.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I mean, it just indicates too that that we have responsibilities in this board which is an oversight and review process too. So let us hope that Waverley does not fail, because we don't. If you fail, you don't want to have to pay fines, because that costs and that has an impact on everything else. And it's a downward spiral. Annalisa, thank you for that. No more comments on that. We'll move on to item 9, which is a discussion to award fire remediation and door replacement programs to award the contract. And I believe Drew is going to talk to us about that. Drew, we're waiting. We're very excited.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you for giving me the time this morning. So I'm bring forward and asking the executive co-portfolio holder to endorse the signing of a new contract. So give you a bit of background, we've got a current contract with Ian Williams, which arose following some urgent works required at Riverside Court about 2 years ago. The contract wasn't tendered through Section 20, so it kind of limited our ability to recharge for costs where we'd be normally be entitled to. So we tendered this new contract. It'd be for maximum of 6 years, and we winning bidder was Ian Williams. So we're looking to enter into this contract. The contracts will be for what we call passive fire protection. So this will include repairs to compartmentation, installation of new fire doors, and the sort of maintenance and repair of fire doors going forward. So this also covers a slight gap in our current contracts, because we don't currently have a contractor in place that has the capability to maintain fire doors, at least not a contractor with the suitable sort of training. And that's I think that's basically the summary of what we're proposing. I don't know if there's anyone had any particular questions.
Thanks, Drew. Yep, we do. I've got Jackie with a question. Anybody else? I have 2 questions, Drew, if I may. Yeah, forgive my dumbness, but on paragraph 4.7, it says the contract is JCT measured term and terms are written. What's JCT?
So it's the Joint Contracts Tribunal. So it's an organisation that basically drafts like skeleton contracts, which we can then add our own terms to, and they're basically sort of industry recognised contracts that we can call upon.
You can see I've done this before. Thanks, Drew. Second question. If I have in a flat or communal living area, and I have my own front door, but it's on a shared corridor or something. If I want to have a little spy hole put in there so I can see who's knocking on the door, that will have an impact on the fire regulation. Is that right? Is there something that, what is our approach there? Do we have to replace the whole door with a little hole in it, or what?
We probably would, yes, because once you start drilling into a fire door, you basically take away its integrity. And if you don't sort of complete the works as per the manufacturer's test evidence, we can't guarantee the door would be sort of fire safe and would actually hold up in the event of a fire. Whilst it is technically feasible to add a spy hole or post box or whatever else you might want to add to a door retrospectively, as I say, it doesn't. We may not. The door may not sort of stand up to a fire. We wouldn't have the test evidence to prove that.
Drew, do we have do officers have any views on standards for this? I mean, would we, by definition, not put a letterbox into people's new fire doors, or what do we do?
Our current policy would be that we wouldn't do it. I mean, we have had sort of cases come up recently where tenants have asked for permission to add spy holes. That one commonly comes up. The policy would be to say no to those requests. When we install new fire doors, we'll be including spy holes as standard, just even if tenants aren't using them, at least they're there and we don't have to add them retrospectively later.
Okay, thanks. Let me pass over to Jackie now.
Thank you. Just one question, Drew. Have you got the workforce to actually carry out the amount of work required by Waverley?
Yes, I think I alluded to this on one of the points. I can't remember which one, but yeah, one of the questions we did put to Ian Williams for sort of clarification is whether they have the workforce, and they've assured us that they do. So at the moment they have a project ongoing with another client, which they've advised is going to be ending at the end of March, and so once that project's ended, that it's going to free up a large part of their workforce, and they've assured us that they'll have enough capacity to cover our workload.
Okay, Jackie. Any other comments, Dennis?
On the contractors, do they still have to tender for the contract, or have you dispensed with that at the moment?
No, this was a tender process. So the tender went out towards the end of December. It was open for a little over a month just to allow for Christmas shutdown periods. But yeah, it's gone through the full tender process. We had 3 bidders, and officers from the housing department reviewed the returns, and so it's gone through all the Waverley's usual sort of procurement exercises.
Right. Only I was on the council in Sittingbourne in Kent, and they used to tender the contracts, and they always went for the lowest contract, lowest bid, which was not always successful. We had a lot of problems, and coming up here, I was hoping that things might be a bit different.
And so I can't speak for all contracts, but I think in this case, Ian Williams weren't the cheapest. They were slightly more expensive than the cheapest. There wasn't a huge amount of difference, to be honest. But where Ian's won it was the quality. They were sort of quite a few points ahead in the quality part.
How do you assess the quality of the Ian Williams?
Well, there was a number of things we asked for. I mean, part of it was asking for their capacity and confirming that they had the workforce available to complete it. We asked about their credentials and the type of training their operatives go through, so we could be certain that they have the knowledge and capability to do this kind of work. Yeah. We asked about the availability of like tenant liaisons and things like that to sort of work with tenants to get bookings and to deal with complaints and that sort of thing. So there was a number of things we went through with them just as part of that quality part.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Drew. Thanks, Dennis. So, members, shortly, at the end of this meeting, at the start of this next one, there will be a recommendation for me, basically, as co-portfolio holder. It's recommended that the executive co-portfolio holder for housing endorses the signing of the fire remediation and fire door installation contract with Ian Williams. So I'm not hearing anybody who's going to tell me not to. Good. I won't dwell on that any longer, just in case you change your mind. Okay, Drew, thank you very much for that. And then finally, moving on to item 10, our work programme, Annalisa.
Good afternoon. No, still good morning, everybody. So within your pack, you've got the details of the work programme and the forthcoming agenda items. So for our next meeting, we'll give you an update on how we're progressing with the tenant satisfaction measures project. There'll be a presentation from our responsive repairs and voids contractor. Remember, Chris Shipway came and spoke to us just when the contract started, and delighted that we've got to Neil, who's joined us today, who's their resident liaison officer. So we'll be able to give you a little bit more explanation, and they'll be able to give a presentation of how the contract's going and what they're finding and how they're trying to get solutions to make sure we're delivering the best service we can. And we will also have the routine Q3 performance and the service plans. And finally, there will also be a presentation from Hugh Wagstaff. You may remember him, who is now our housing asset strategic asset manager, and he'll be giving you an update on the housing asset management strategy and giving you some more information about the progress with the stock condition survey. I do want to raise that it was discussed that potentially the April meeting may have to be postponed or removed from the agenda because there wasn't any available space in the council because of the forthcoming elections. So what I've done is moved agenda items into March and then pushed some things back to May because there was nothing time critical. But I did wonder if the board wanted, if the date was already in your diary, whether you wanted it as an informal away day or a discussion day, so we could look at the work plan together more comprehensively and actually work through some of the things that came out of the regulatory meeting last week. That would be the 27th of April. But you'd have to find a location outside of the council buildings, but I'm sure we could use a senior living lounge or some other area.
John?
Yeah, as we know, April, that's what, a week before the elections. I think I would find it difficult to attend because we've got other things to do. And of course, we've got to bear in mind the PERDA restrictions that we're under. I wouldn't have thought that transgressed it, but we just have to make sure that if somebody attended, that we did obey those rules.
For the if there's any doubt, we mean the pre-election period. I'm happy to take an hour or so off stuffing things through letterboxes, which would probably be too late by then anyway, but I'm happy to join with anybody who so wishes. Annalisa, do you mind awfully trying to arrange that sort of thing?
That's my team and I can arrange that. So I think we'll have it as an informal session. There won't be democratic services, there won't be any official minutes. I think it would be an opportunity for the board to meet outside of the board meeting and have a discussion about the future. I think that would be a good suggestion.
Annie?
We obviously need to take care because we are in pre-election. So what we discuss and who we discuss it with, we just need to be very careful on that meeting. It will need to be outside the democratic process. We can't make future plans at that meeting because of the pre-election.
Yeah, absolutely.
rules.
So what we're saying is we can't agree a work plan, but we could have a discussion about topics that
are of interest to the
topics
tenants.
of interest to tenants.
To tenants.
Okay.
You understand the wording?
Absolutely.
Tenants.
And it sounds like some of the councillors may not be able to attend anyway, so potentially it could be the tenants meeting. Shall we discuss this outside of the board meeting? But yes, I will aim for some, we will use the day, the 27th of April, for those who can attend to talk about tenants' requests of the board.
And of course, tenants, this is your board as much as it is councillors. So yeah, absolutely. Jackie?
Can I just say that, yes, we won't be able to attend. And for those of us who may be lucky to get back and come back on the board, you can then report to us at the next meeting.
Yeah. No pressure, Jackie, right? No pressure. No. Okay. So Annalisa, over to you on that. Thank you very much. Item 11 then, and Annalisa, thank you for the extra sheet. Andrew, so housing services update, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of things. We've seen some changes in the in the officer lineup. Hugh Wagstaff's been mentioned. He's settled into his role as strategic asset manager. We welcome Matt to the meeting today to talk to us about damp and mould. That was his opening gambit. That was his debut onto the theatrical stage of the Landlord Services Advisory Board, damp and mould. I'm sure there'll be more from Matt as we go through. Very, very pleased to have Matt on board, as Heather has now left us to take up a new position down in Wiltshire. Also, our housing manager, Laura Dillon, has been off for a long time, unwell, and we've needed to put in an interim officer. So Neil Davis, who had been seconded to our Ukraine work, our refugee support work, is now an interim housing manager looking after the housing officers. We've recruited a couple of new ones to strengthen that team. And so Neil is a very experienced officer and is able to manage the team effectively. So I'm grateful to him. And really just to thank the officers and the staff for all that they're doing in housing. Also to thank our director, who we speak much about housing matters, and that's good. And also to thank the tenants and the members of this board for such constructive discussion. It helps me, as relatively new in post, looking at housing operations, particularly on the property services side, and I find it as much educative as I do in terms of helping to steer the ship. So really, it's just a thanks to everyone, and just to let you know of some new staffing changes. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Andrew. Any comments, questions? Thank you all, members. And so finally, item 12, date of next meeting, Thursday, the 30th of March. But I check in my diary that it's not in here, it's in room 1. Is there any confirmation of that, Annalisa? Oh, sorry. Or Democratics. Is it on next meeting, 30th of March?
30th of March, I'd have to check the location at
Hi, it's Kizzy. I'm just going to wade in for a little bit. Yes, I'm sorry we were kicked out because there's a planning review, and so we'll be in committee room 1.
Thank you. So see you all not here, but round the corner next month. I know, it's not on. So members, thank you very much. All over. And in 5 minutes, I'll do the next bit. So that'll give you time to stretch your legs, go home, or whatever. All right, bringing you to your attention. Good. Put your hand up if you're not here. That's fine. So, members, my name is Paul Rivers and I am Executive Co-Portfolio Holder for Housing Operations at Waverley. We are here this morning to consider a matter which requires executive decision. These matters have been considered at the Landlord Services Advisory Board, and in taking the decisions this morning, by Dennis, in taking the decision this morning, I will be taking account of the discussion and comments raised at that meeting. So we have a recommendation before us. And that this recommendation states, it is recommended that the co-portfolio holder for housing endorses the signing of the fire remediation and fire door installation contract with Ian Williams Limited with a maximum contract duration 2023 to 2028. And John, question.
Sorry, the tenants here, have they seen the confidential papers? Because obviously we've had a problem in the past where they haven't necessarily seen them, and I wonder how they would judge this if they hadn't seen the confidential papers.
Well, firstly, they don't need to see them, and they haven't seen them, and they are pink papers, so they wouldn't see them. But that's only specifically around the cost. The concept is something that they have reviewed, are in their papers, and have raised no objection to. Does that make clear?
Yep, thanks, just making the point.
Any more comments? In which case I am happy to so endorse that contract. Oh, even better. Any other comments on that? Is any other special wording that needs to be said? Right. And I'm very happy to end a very short meeting. Thank you.
Jim, can I just ask you to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting?
Beg your pardon. Yeah, so let us reverse slightly. I confirm the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 26th of January and published on our website. And Fiona, I'm sure there are no declarations.
There were no declarations, no questions from members of the public and no questions from members.
And nothing like getting a meeting started after it's ended. Thank you very much. Thank you all.